Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
And I'm Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement at SBM, filling in for Sarah Miller today. I'm going to take a second to welcome a new member to SBM. That's Jared Anthony Salon and Spa in Wyandotte. And they are an elite member. And a little bit about them, their client satisfaction is their top priority. They aim to deliver a truly unique experience that goes beyond expectations through ongoing education and expertise so that their clients know they're in the best hands. So, welcome to Jared Rushlow and his team in Wyandotte. Brian, we're going to kick off the show today to talk about something that you mentioned last week, which was obviously the federal government shutdown. You said that you thought they would strike a deal quickly in the sense that it's been obviously over a month, but there is a lot of action over the weekend. So, what has changed?
Yeah, last week I knew that it would be different in the short term compared to the previous month. The previous month, there was nothing in particular that was going to push the two sides to a deal, but a lot of the ramifications that would create pressure on the system were just coming to a head a week ago. So I was pretty sure that even though there wasn't a deal in the works and you couldn't see kind of how they were going to find their way or who was going to cave or give first on this process, but it was clear to me that they wouldn't be able to withstand the type of pressure that they were about to face for very long. And over the weekend, they did apparently reach a deal, and so I wasn't terribly surprised by it. But this does, even with that deal, already goes down in history and as the longest federal government shutdown ever.
So what is in the deal as you understand it? We obviously hear a lot from, news media pundits that make a lot of speculation, but obviously there's a lot of conversations behind closed doors. So what have we found out kind of leading into today that might be in that deal?
Essentially, what the deal is a continuation of the status quo. But remember, the status quo is kind of a new status quo that was established after the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed earlier this year. So that's one misunderstanding I've seen on this. When one side says, "Well, why don't we just do a continuation budget?" and the other side saying that's not good enough, and why would a continuation budget not be good enough? Well, it's a continuation of recently made changes, and so because they had some leverage, the Democrats in the Senate in particular were looking to use that as leverage to relitigate some of the issues from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And so my understanding of what the deal is that eight different Senate Democrats came on board with the Senate Republicans to support a vote for closure on the essentially ending debate. It's a vote to end debate on a bill. It's commonly referred to as the filibuster rule. So you have to have 60 votes in order to move something from debate to the process of actually voting on it. And from here on out, once you close debate with that 60 vote margin, at that point, the future votes only require an overall majority. So what was it then that the Democrats received in order to change their position from not supporting ending debate or essentially instituting a filibuster to letting it move forward? And my understanding is that the big change is that or the big commitment, if you will, is that they'll get a clean vote on the extension of Affordable Care Act subsidies that were ended in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So the Affordable Care Act, of course, has been in place I guess it was 2009, I think, when the vote happened and essentially went into place in those intervening years. And then it was changed or increased during the pandemic. There were pandemic era subsidies that were added into the mix at that time. That's what's at dispute right now, is that the Republicans wanted to let those subsidies expire. The Democrats wanted them to continue, and they were all kind of rolled up together in that One Big Beautiful Bill Act from earlier this year. And so what the Democrats were able to secure was a commitment that they would have a clean vote on extension of those. No guarantee that it's going to pass, but a clean vote. And from their perspective, I think they believe enough in it to where they think it's a win whether it fails or passes, because they'll get Republicans on record voting no, which could be used in political ways, or maybe they win the vote and the subsidies continue. So to them, they kind of it's a no lose type situation from their perspective. The Republicans, of course, are, I'm sure, very relieved to have the shutdown on a path now toward resolution, because these ramifications have become quite palpable, and so that's really that. I think that's what pushed the two sides together. That's what changed in the last week.
So a lot of questions have been even happening within the office today, which is what happens now? What is the true time frame on this? They say that they came to a deal. Does it happen tomorrow? Does it happen next week? You talked a little bit about the process on the front end, but what's next?
Yeah, there are several steps that are still remaining, and normally these steps would unfold over the course of a matter of weeks. I presume they probably will seek to move faster than normal in order to get this resolved and officially um, ratified, if you will. The process, because the difficult vote, the one to end debate and move on to passage, that's the one that takes the longest, but because there are several procedural steps here in the future, it would normally take a few weeks in order to get that. I imagine, though, that given how long this has gone on, that whatever tools are available to them to speed it up, they'll take advantage they'll take full advantage of. So if they can suspend certain rules and move things along faster, I think you'll probably see that. Now, how fast can they move, or how fast can they go? I think that is definitely an open question. But I will be surprised if they go into Thanksgiving, like break or recess or whatever, without this being taken care of.
So, a little bit of a string to this, if you will, is there was an executive order signed by the president about flights specifically. We've seen a lot of cancellations over the last few weeks, obviously, with the impact of federal workers throughout airports for safety concerns. And so now that this deal is, in theory, struck, if you will, not exactly put into practice yet. Will that executive order be lifted, or what does that look like with all of the flight concerns that have been happening around the country?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that air traffic controllers are federal employees, and they are considered essential. In other words, they have to keep on working even without a budget, and therefore it's without pay. They get back pay when for the time that they did work. But what happens is the longer that it drags on, the more likely people are either burnout or just calling sick. They're not going to work without pay any longer. So those sorts of things, there wasn't any kind of big walkout or anything like that, but just kind of the erosion of people having the um, the will or the willingness to work any longer without pay. It was eroding the ability of air traffic controls to function normally and safely. And the only option really is to reduce the number of flights. So the president had done an executive order, and it started last Friday in terms of its effectiveness, that they were supposed to certain airports were ordered to reduce their flights by 4%. These were domestic flights, not international flights, by 4% starting on Friday, 6% by tomorrow, and 8% on Thursday, and 10% by next Friday. That was the original schedule. And but an update, and kind of in dramatic fashion. The president today had has really kind of laid it on thick, or used very strong language, demanding that air traffic control officers all come to work as normal now. No more calling in. There is a deal. They will get paid. Not exactly clear how long it will take, um, but but clearly the idea of interruption of flight. There's nothing that really ticks people off like their flight plans getting screwed up, and whether it's business or pleasure, or for family reasons that people are traveling. That's a big part of the pressure that has been building when you saw actual flight disruptions starting. So The president went so far as to say those who do show up without missing any work, or that those who hadn't missed any work, he was going to recommend, I don't know his ability to just make this happen, but $10,000 bonuses for each of them. And but also that those who miss pay going forward will be docked. In other words, if you call in sick, essentially, I don't know, they're not going to believe you or something. But so I would say that I don't know the procedures for repealing the order. I assume that that's happening given the verbal posture that the president's laying out there today. Clearly, um, the disruption of flights has struck a nerve, and there seems to be a particular sense of urgency behind getting that back to normal.
Definitely some nerves that have been struck over this past 40 plus day period. So we'll obviously keep a watch on that. Let's switch a little bit. You had been kind of projecting a softening of the labor market, and obviously we haven't been able to access a normal jobs report over the last month or so, given that the shutdown was occurring. So you've been looking at some alternative sources throughout the last week or two. What are you finding in those alternative sources?
Yeah, I've been harping on the Federal Reserve and just that they've kept interest rates too high for too long. They've already um, cut into what was a fairly healthy labor market and now looks weak in a lot of ways. But again, we don't have the jobs numbers. And so there is Challenger Gray and Christmas, which is a firm that looks at and compiles public job cut announcements. So this is not a survey of the entire economy, but like the Bureau of Labor Statistics does. But this is an indication of public announcements of job cuts, and so they tend to be larger companies or movements by larger companies. So their national numbers show the October job cut announcements at 153,000. Public job cut announcements, 153,000. And that's 183% of the same period in the previous in the previous year in 2024. There were 54,000 before. So a really big jump through the first 10 months. Remember, this doesn't mean total number of jobs has gone down. These are just the job cut announcements. There's other jobs being created in other areas. So it's a data point, but the fact that it's looking at it compared to the previous year, it's so much bigger is what I think really does point toward further softening in the jobs market. Looking through the first 10 months, before I gave you just October's numbers, in the first 10 months, 1,099,500. So almost 1.1 million. And that's a 65% increase over the first 10 months of last year. So not quite as big a percentage increase, but again, pointing towards softening. If you look in Michigan in particular, in October, there were 5,207 job cut announcements. So this is a subset of of the same report that I'm talking about here. And so 5,207 layoff announcements in the last month, and that's 27% of the total for the whole year. So the 27% of the whole year happened in 1 month. And it would point to maybe an acceleration of softening that's happening here in Michigan. So, looking at Michigan compared to the Midwest, about double of what happened in Illinois, and then but the leader actually among these year to date anyway of layoffs is Ohio. But there's a caveat to that, and Ohio has a lot more federal employees than than Michigan. So there were a lot of federal layoffs. Presumably, though, most of those will be called back, but but not all of them. When you look at the change, some of the changes are permanent. So the shutdown in the last 40 days, those will be called back, but the ones that were eliminated previous to that probably won't. So it's I'd say just on balance, it just looks like continued softening in the jobs market, and is continuing to build the case that the Federal Reserve ought to be more afraid of a soft jobs market or a poor labor market more than inflation at this point.
It's all kind of, we began our program here with the federal shutdown that kind of just all ties together. So we'll end that portion of this part of the program and kind of pivot here a little bit. So it's hard to believe that we're in November. Obviously, in January and February, SBM was in the middle of discussions on the Earned Sick Time Act, or ESTA, as we have talked about in depth on this program and obviously throughout our organization. And so while we weren't completely satisfied, obviously, with what happened in February, it was better than what we were going to get. And we've shared our sentiments on that. But now we're all coming to the end of the year, and there are probably some things that we need to revisit in the form of requirements as we end the year, Brian. And so, just a reminder that we do offer some compliance practices and templates if you're interested in that here at SBM. But what do our friends need to know about end of the year requirements when it comes to ESTA?
We do have a an article that we just published on this was shared into the comments, but that is a but here's a couple of the highlights that I think are really important to and important to keep in mind. If you are offering an accrual-based benefit, if you're offering an accrual-based benefit, there are carryover requirements. And that means that if somebody at the end of the year they have a certain amount of sick time or earned sick time that they have not used, then you need to carry that over to the next year. But you can put a cap on what you carry over. If you have 1 to 10 employees, you don't have to carry it over any more than 40 hours. If you have 11 or more employees, as defined by the Act, and there's specific ways of how you count employees, then you have to carry over 72 hours if of unused earned sick time. So that is only for accrual based. If you have the front loaded, you just recharge it at the beginning of the year. So there's no carryover. Anything unused just goes away. There's no carryover requirement. One caveat though is that if you front load part-timers, um, what they make you do on that is a little complicated and frankly, I think kind of ridiculous. But when you front load it, you could prorate based on how many hours you think somebody was going to work. But you actually have to go back and calculate how many hours did they work, how much would they have received on based on the actual numbers prorated, and then compare it to how much you gave them before, and then true it up if you were short. So just something to keep in mind if you have part-timers with front-loaded earned sick time benefits, that you need to essentially look at the assumptions you based on their prorated benefits on, true it up at the end of the year based on actual hours worked, and then make any adjustments if necessary. There's some other suggestions that we have as well in that article, but just wanted to share with you some of the highlights. It's the first time, it's the first round. Everybody's going through this for the very first time. And it makes sense to just make sure that you're on top of it and doing everything correctly.
Thanks, Brian. And again, please do visit our website just to review some of that compliance. And if you haven't used our toolkit, we invite you to do so. Another thing that you briefly touched base on last week, Monday, was a new data center project in Saline. And we have had a chance to review that project and have weighed in a little bit on how we feel about that. So why don't you share our evaluation of that project that was released probably not next week, the week before.
You know, the one of the things that is that makes some of these projects controversial is that people worry that, well, you got this big new user of electricity, and is that going to make everybody's rates go up? In this case, there's a couple of things that are happening. First of all, DTE, and this is in DTE's territory, they actually have excess capacity to cover the energy needs. There's just a few peak days where it might run short. You know, there's certain days when everybody has their air conditioner on. It doesn't happen that often, but there's some peak days when it could exceed available capacity. And so here's the situation as I understand it, or as the application has been made to the Public Service Commission. The majority of the load is carried by current infrastructure. That actually has a benefit to all ratepayers. So in other words, the cost of the infrastructure is spread over more users. So nothing new is being built. It's just the current infrastructure is paid for by, in part, paid for by this big new user. So in that sense, it's a benefit to other ratepayers. What about those peak days? That's probably the biggest concern when it comes to availability, wanting to, of course, avoid brownouts or overtaxing the system. And they're actually buying, the company that is installing this is actually buying on-site battery capacity in order to make up for those peak days. And they would need it for backup generation anyway. And and so that's in that, and according to the paperwork that was filed, is completely fully 100% paid for by the company, the data center company. So in other words, it's not something that will be spread to other ratepayers. So this application, while I know that people can have an issue or a problem with, they just don't want big data centers and because they use electricity and water and so there's environmental, kind of an environmental position on that. But in terms of ratepayers, both reliability and rates paid, this actually is something that could be a benefit, but at least not a harm to other ratepayers. So hopefully a sign of things to come as these types of developments go in, that there is special care to ensure that they at least do no harm to other ratepayers in the system, but hopefully provide a benefit in spreading the cost of the existing infrastructure over a big new user.
And we will be sure to follow that project and update the viewership accordingly as things come in. Let's switch to 2026 Election Watch, one of our favorites here on the advocacy team. And there was some new polling done that has shed some light on our gubernatorial race as it pertains to next year. So let's start with the Democrats. What is it showing us?
Yeah, it's an interesting cycle, of course, because there is a very high profile independent, and they're just one of those. And so there's not, there's a third factor in here. But remember, before you get to that final stage, there's two primaries. This poll, nothing surprising when it came to the poll among the Democrats. So this was done by Rosetta Stone from Georgia. It's a real deal polling firm, but they did not reveal who paid for the poll. Usually they'll say if it was a nonprofit or a university or something like that, and sometimes that means that a candidate paid for the poll. So we just have to kind of take a grain of salt in how questions were asked, but this is a legit polling firm. Okay, so it's not a fly-by-night or a hack type firm. All right, so what they and the results actually looked in the ballpark of other things that we've seen. So it's Benson at 58%. So Jocelyn Benson among the Democrats has really looked um, like she's been in pole position the whole time. Number two, Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist polled at 15%, and then you had Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson at 6%. And actually 6% for Swanson is pretty good because he's a sheriff in Genesee. It's not like he's got strong statewide name ID. But if you were to look at the fundraising, you would see that the poll results look an awful lot like the fundraising, where Benson has really kind of dominated on that side of the ticket.
So let's switch over to the Republicans. What was happening over there?
On the Republicans, they asked in a couple different ways. They did like the current ballot, but the current announced candidates, at least the ones that appear kind of in good or strong position to make the ballot, to collect all the signatures and qualify for the ballot. But then they did a hypothetical and threw in another candidate. So let's start with the actual ballot with the actual candidates. John James, no surprise, led the field with 44%. Followed by former Attorney General Mike Cox at 13% and Senate Minority Leader Eric Nesbitt at 6%. So with John James being, a current member of Congress and having run statewide twice, of course, his name ID it starts out higher. And then Mike Cox also twice elected Attorney General. It's been several years now, but but coming up a bit higher. And then Senate Minority Leader Eric Nesbitt, of course, coming in lower. He's done some pretty good. He's had pretty strong fundraising, but hasn't spent any of the money building up his own name ID yet. And so those are definitely the candidates that really the ones featured there are the ones that have the most money on hand when it comes to later on telling their story and really amping up their candidacy. The thing that was novel about this poll is they did an additional question on the Republican side. What if the nominee from the last election, Tudor Dixon, got into this election? And and that did make a very significant difference. In that scenario, Tudor Dixon, the most recent Republican nominee for governor, would actually lead at 33%. John James coming in second at 25%. This early on, you should really look at this as a name ID type of a contest. So people don't necessarily know about the nitty gritty of people's agendas and what they would do as governor. It really is kind of a name ID contest at that point. And then Cox at 10%. So um, that was published. Sometimes there could be somebody's trying to recruit Tudor Dixon back into the race, and so they paid for a poll, and the poll gets published to show that she'd be formidable in winning the nomination if she actually ran. She's actually said that she's not running. She's ruled it out. But who knows? You see poll results that show that you have a shot at it. Maybe she'll change her mind, and maybe that's why this poll was done and published in the first place. But it was interesting, and but I would say that kind of hypothetical aside, the rest with the announced candidates, it all looked exactly like you would expect it to look at this stage of the game.
It's all very interesting. We're going to be watching all of it. We're going to be in the middle of it next year. We do get involved, obviously, in elections. And so it definitely started early this year, and 2026 will be here before we know it, especially when it comes to election time. Brian, we have Data Monday, and that's going to close out our show. So I'll hand it back over to you to take
All
us through
right.
the end.
I've got just 4 slides I'm going to share with you, and this is not a lot of new data coming out. That's why there's only 4. But here's a few of the items I thought were particularly interesting. You've got credit card delinquency up to 12%. So that's something really to pay close attention to. Mortgage delinquency typically stays very low. You see during the Great Recession, it got quite high, but historically, that's the one that would be the last to rise. It's gone up a little bit. Car loan delinquency is up a bit as well, looking like it did in the middle of the pandemic. And then the student loans with the loan forgiveness on again, off again, you see that kind of jumping around here too. So, but this would be a sign that that maybe things are a bit slow with loan delinquencies creeping up, the or shooting up is how the credit cards looked. The I wanted to cover a few items here with homes. The housing market definitely looks like it's cooling off now. The In this case, the turnover rate in homes in the first 9 months of the year at 27.7%. You'll see that's lower than it's been in a very long time. And so the number of houses changing hands, a lot of factors on that. People aren't selling their houses as much because they have those lower interest rates. And if they sell and buy a new house somewhere else, they're going to have a much higher interest rate, higher cost, maybe less house for the same amount or more money. And so people are staying put, but also others can't really afford the interest rates and then the prices, the houses, and because of the prices, the down payments, it's hard for people to save that much. Less turnover. Now, kind of tied to that, what percentage of the new buyers are first-time home buyers? And that's at 21% now. That's as low as it's ever been. First-time home buyers have typically been much more as a percentage than what they are today. And you see, this is a trend that has been ongoing for a while. If you just look at the overall, back in 2010, coming out of the Great Recession, remember the housing market really crashed at that time. So houses were far more affordable at that time. And so what happened was first-time home buyers, even though the economy and the jobs market wasn't particularly strong, it started to recover by 2010. But how the houses were far more affordable, and so 50% of people getting into houses at the time were first-time home buyers. This year, 21%. Final slide is looking at the average age, and I apologize if the picture's over the headline here, but the average age of a first-time home buyer in 2025 is 40 years old. So this is it's never been that high. It had been in the low 30s for a long time. And so since the pandemic though, you've seen it shoot up. And all those same factors that I just talked about, why people aren't selling their homes or housing turnover is so low, those same factors are affecting this. And so people are not able to afford a house until much, much later in life. So if you see, sometimes people are surprised to see SBM have such a strong and robust agenda on home ownership. It's a big factor in attracting and retaining workers, high quality workers, is having a housing stock that is in balance with what jobs and wages are in an area. So this is an important part of the our economy, an important factor when it comes to workers, and clearly conditions over the last 4 years have made it exceptionally difficult for people to get into houses.
Well, that's all we have for you today. Reminder that if you live in the Washtenaw region, we have an owner-to-owner meeting on Wednesday evening. Visit our website in order to sign up for that. We're going to have a great program, and we will plan to see you next week, Monday. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.